You're actually giving some testimony on this subject.
Yes, good afternoon, David. Yeah, I testified this morning about the dangers that this new French digital sales tax introduces into understandings about international taxation. It really threatens to undermine the sort of stability of international understandings on tax in two ways. It, first of all, decides to go after companies based on their gross revenues rather than, income or profits, as most tax agreements have provided in the past. And secondly, they arbitrarily set a threshold which basically captures all the big American internet and digital companies. And, most of the smaller French companies get out from under the tax this way. And so it really is kind of a raid on U.S. taxpayers in order to sort of promote their own digital industries.
So, Rufus, as I understand it, you're right, it's on revenues rather than income for the companies, but it's specifically directed to digital services provided to French people, right? So it's not global revenues, it's the ones specifically derived from France.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that, David, because they take the global revenues and then they determine sort of what percentage of total kind of digital services activities France represents, without respect to whether a particular company has actually done that much or whether you've actually show that many, hits or digital transactions for that company. So it kind of sets it arbitrarily. But the bigger problem is it then exempts smaller companies from it. It sets a threshold which captures the big guys. And it's such a revolutionary approach to taxation anyway, because instead of looking at income and where you actually do your business, where your profits are allocated, where you have your operations and that sort of thing, it arbitrarily taxes all of it in France.
So Rufus, tell us about this proceeding that you testified in. It's a Section 301. We've heard that number before recently. It's one of President Trump's favorites as a practical matter. The administration announced this before actually President Macron of France, had signed the statute into effect. What is the likelihood they will find that Section 301 would be appropriate here, and what would be the retaliation?
Well, I don't think I can answer the second question yet, David, because first you have to have this investigation. So what happens under Section 301 is, as you know, this gives the U.S. Trade Representative the authority to look at foreign policies or practices that are unreasonable and unjustifiable and impose restrictions on U.S. trade. There are issues here about whether this French law would violate, for example, their obligations under the WTO Agreement on Trade and Services, which is called GATS. That's one avenue for them to take. They also can look at other aspects of it, on a more bilateral basis. We hope what will happen here is that the French will realize that what they should be doing is working in the OECD process. There's a process in the OECD to try to set, to update the rules on how to treat the digital economy under existing tax regimes and how to allocate profits, how to make these determinations. And we think the French ought to follow that multilateral process rather than acting unilaterally.
On this trade issue, Rufus, do we have some allies around the world? As you mentioned OECD, there's been an ongoing process. The idea was the OECD countries would get together and agree how to handle these sorts of things. Do we have allies that are similarly trying to put pressure on France, saying, please don't go forward with this?
I think there will be. I think the European Union itself is somewhat very concerned about this, because if each country starts independently setting its own system, it's going to create a balkanization of tax regimes and a lot of competitive taxation schemes designed to achieve sort of digital protection. And that's a big worry of the European Union. I think a number of other countries, I think our neighbors here in Canada and Mexico are just about to conclude a deal with us, the USMCA, which has rules about the digital economy. I think there are a lot of countries that will want to say, don't go down this unilateral path, France, follow a multilateral system.